Line with us is our buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, his most recent, Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, of course, and rdwolff with 2fs.com are his websites, and you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, Profwolff. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
And Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So I have two questions for you, and I'm not sure if they're kind of the same thing or they're completely different. But the first is, we're all hearing about the $2-point-something trillion that these three packages, almost $3 trillion that these three packages that Congress has passed that are going to be funded with the Treasury issuing bond, essentially borrowing money. But there's also reports of the Fed. Well, this morning, the Financial Times was talking about the Fed is going to push, $2.3 trillion out. I'm not sure exactly to who or under what circumstances. And I've seen other reports that they're going to push out as much as $4 trillion. What's the difference between those two, and where does that Fed money come from, number one? And number two, will we ever get back to normal again? And if so, what will it look like? What will that transition be?
Okay. Let's start with what seems to be, and pardon my humor, it's just I get these questions so often that they become kind of funny in the repetition. People are mystified, which I understand. Where does that money come from in both the cases of the U.S. Treasury doing what Congress passes and the Federal Reserve doing pretty much what it likes? So let's start with the Federal Reserve. Here's the thing that's so difficult. The Federal Reserve creates as much money as it thinks the situation requires. It creates it out of nothing. That's very important for people to understand, however discomforting it might be. That's their job. They used to do it in the physical sense of printing the paper bills and coining the coins that we use, the quarters and the nickels and the dimes. Nowadays, they don't do it that way. Most money is now electronic. So by hitting a key on a computer somewhere in Washington, $1 million shows up in somebody's account. It was created by the click of that mouse pad and that mouse in some corporate executive's office in the Federal Reserve. So they create money in the literal sense of that term. And the part of the crisis we're in now that they play is they have decided, the Federal Reserve, that the economy needs a ton of new money. This comes, mind you, after 20 years of record-breaking increases in the quantity of money that the Federal Reserve has produced and injected into the economy. So it comes on top of all of that. Here are trillions of additional out-of-thin-air created dollar bills and accounts at banks. And the people who get this money are overwhelmingly banks. Some insurance companies, some companies that themselves issue bonds will now be able to give them to the Federal Reserve, which will, quote-unquote, buy them using the fresh new money that they have created out of nothing to pay for them. And the whole idea is, think of it as an automobile metaphor, which isn't working real well, and you've decided that the problem isn't the motor or the condenser or this or that. It's lubrication, it's oil. And so you take a can of oil and you spray it into the front of the automobile or wherever all the equipment is, and you hope that this lubrication of literally everything with an immense dose of oil will get the thing running again. That's what the Federal Reserve is doing. Money is like oil. It makes the world go round. It makes American capitalism function, they hope. And that's what they're doing. So that's the 2 to 4 trillion you hear about from time to time. Since the Federal Reserve has no oversight, there's really nobody in charge of the Federal Reserve. They're in charge of themselves. They're given, by intent, independence, both from the Congress and from the executive branch. They're out there doing what they think is appropriate. They have conferences and discussions with others in the government, but they are their own thing. Now let's turn to the government itself. Mr. Trump in the two houses of Congress. What they do is a completely different thing. They are not allowed to create or print money. That right is given to the Federal Reserve exclusively. So what the Treasury does, it has to get whatever money it wants to pump into the economy, and they're now talking, as you said, about the $2.2 trillion, more or less. They have to get that either by taxing the people of this country, the people and the businesses, or by borrowing it. Those are the only two ways they can get the money that they want to inject into the economy. It would make no sense to tax, because then the money the government injects into the economy would be offset by the money it's pulling out in the way of taxes. So it doesn't do that. What does it do? It borrows the money. Well, here it gets kind of cute. Who does it borrow the money from? Well, the only people who lend to the government are very, very wealthy individuals and banks and insurance companies and large corporations. Nobody else is a major player in this business, with one exception, and that's foreign governments. So when the United States government borrows money, it borrows from rich people, corporations, insurance companies, banks, and foreign governments. For example, and this blows Americans' minds too, as it should, the largest creditor of the United States government is the People's Republic of China. The United States is the largest debtor country in the world. That is, our government has borrowed more than any other government, and nobody else is close. And the government that has lent to the United States is the People's Republic of China. But they've also borrowed from all kinds of other sources. So for them to do what they're doing is basically saying to corporations and the rich, look, we're in a crisis. You have no place to use your money. Your money is sitting there doing you no good, and it's not good for the economy that it isn't active. So here's the deal. Lend it to us, the U.S. government. We will not only pay you back, we'll pay you interest while we hold it, and we're going to make sure it gets spent. So that's really what this government stimulus is about. It's taking money doing nothing from people who have a lot of money doing nothing, which excludes 90% of our population, of course. It borrows from the rich in order to keep going an economy that is dominated by those same rich institutions. If this sounds incestuous, good, then I've been clear in my explanation. The fact that both the Fed wants to create trillions of new money after doing it for 20 years, and that the Treasury and the Congress want to inject another several trillion, gives you an idea of how severely depressed the U.S. economy now is.